Now, next on Outside Source, we're going to turn back to the conflict in the east of Ukraine. We talked about it an awful lot in 2014 when the war there first broke out between Russia-backed separatists and Ukrainian troops. We're talking about it today because there are multiple reports of a Russian military build-up. Ukraine says 28 Russian battalion groups involving 25,000 personnel have appeared along its north and eastern borders in the last few days. Reports suggest some Russian artillery has come from as far as Siberia. And according to Ukraine, Russia has 3,000 officers and military instructors in areas of the east of Ukraine that are marked here in red and which have been controlled by Russia-backed separatists since they were seized in 2014. While Moscow very much denies helping the rebels, it says any Russians involved are volunteers. There is, though, a lot of proof to suggest otherwise. Now, since 2014, there have been multiple ceasefires which have broken down. The most recent was agreed in July, but this is the situation now. There's still sporadic fighting along the line of separation. That stretches for 500 kilometres. For example, these pictures are from a place called Avdiivka. This is in territory held by Ukrainian troops. And this is the account of one Ukrainian soldier on the front line.
Every day we've been hearing their armoured units and tanks driving. The tanks aren't far away, 1 kilometre tops. We can hear them warming up the tanks and infantry fighting vehicles.
Now, Russia hasn't denied troop movements, but it denies planning any form of military attack. Here's a Kremlin spokesperson.
The main thing is to not provoke again the military hostilities of the Ukrainian armed forces in relation to their own people or people who live in the self-proclaimed republics. The situation in eastern Ukraine remains very tense. Any statements which can then be used to create the wrong picture can only further fuel tensions. I don't want to do it.
Well, everyone agrees the situation's tense, but not many share Russia's perspective on this, certainly not in the West. Last week, the US put its forces in Europe on higher alert, citing escalations of Russian aggression. Then on Monday, the EU's foreign policy chief raised severe concern over the Russian military activity surrounding Ukraine. The UK added it too had significant concerns. And have a listen to the former Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt.
Obviously, they are getting all of these forces to the city of Ukraine for some sort of purpose. I mean, to put pressure on Ukraine diplomatically, or perhaps to undertake a limited operation, hard strike, and then pave the way for some sort of diplomacy in order to pressure Kiev into further concessions on the issue, to get some movement from the Russian point of view in their direction in the Ukraine conflict. It is clearly a deliberate decision by the Kremlin to escalate the conflict. Where this will lead us, we don't know, but it's dangerous.
Now, let's be clear. Russia does hold military exercises in this region, but this analyst in The Guardian points out that the current troop deployment appears out of cycle for such exercises and are not regular troop rotations. And every time Russia does something irregular of this nature, it draws attention back to what happened in 2014. This was Vladimir Putin in Crimea 2 months after Russia annexed the region from Ukraine. It was the biggest land grab in Europe since the Second World War, and the escalation in the east of Ukraine then followed. Well, let's get the analysis now of Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. First of all, what's your reading of Russia's motivation for moving all of these troops?
Well, it's a frozen conflict that appears to be getting hotter, and we've been seeing lots of social media posts of tanks and artillery and armoured vehicles being moved about right next to Ukraine's border. Russia says that it's free to do as it pleases within its territory. If it wishes to send its troops somewhere, yes, so be it. But Ukrainians know that what can happen after you see Russian troops being moved about right next to a border. Next thing you know is armoured men with no insignia storming your local government buildings. As for why now, what's going on, one trend of thought that we've picked up while watching Russian media, the independent parts of the Russian media, is that there's another big story unfolding in Russia involving a key opposition figure called Alexei Navalny, who's in jail, hunger striking, apparently very ill, And that situation is of great concern to Vladimir Putin, and Russia is under threat of more sanctions because of that. So the thinking goes among some of the independent commentators in Russia is that this could be a distraction from the Navalny situation, which could potentially lead to more deaths.
Stay with me, Vitaly. A couple of other things I want to ask you about, because this is happening against a backdrop of heightened tensions between Russia and the NATO defence alliance. For example, this was Euronews in February of last year, telling us that the US had announced plans to send 20,000 troops to train with NATO on Ukraine's border. Then in September last year, Georgia, which shares a border with Russia as well, launched joint exercises with NATO. Then there's this Reuters article 2 days ago confirming joint drills between the UK and the Ukrainian army that will take place this summer, again with NATO involvement. And yesterday, NATO Secretary General tweeted, NATO firmly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Russia has warned NATO against sending troops to Ukraine in any capacity. But this highlights, Vitaly, the fact that this hasn't come out of the blue.
Well, no, Russia and Ukraine have been throwing accusations of aggression at each other for years. And what's happening now poses serious questions for President Zelensky in Ukraine, for example. He's been saying that NATO is the answer. If Ukraine joins the alliance, then what he calls Russian aggression will stop. But that, as far as the Kremlin is concerned, that only is making things worse. President Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said recently that if NATO increases its support for Ukraine, Russia will have to respond forcefully.
Vitaly, there's another element to this story that I want to ask you about, and this concerns information that the Ukrainians are claiming is disinformation. But Russia says it's launched a criminal case over the Ukrainian military reportedly killing a child in a Ukrainian attack in rebel-held territory in Donbass, again in the east of Ukraine. Vitaly, what do you know about these allegations?
Well, here, parallels with what happened 7 years ago are, again, impossible to ignore. Then Russia again said that Ukrainian troops, or Russian media said Ukrainian troops crucified a child in rebel-held territory. Now, what we've seen in terms of proof of what happened comes from rebels, Russia-backed rebels in eastern Ukraine, and Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian sources are saying that the evidence on which these allegations are based is flimsy at best. For example, the claim is that the child was killed by a bomb dropped by a Ukrainian drone, while the location is out of reach of the drones operated by the Ukrainian army, so Ukrainian officials and the media say. Also, there have been social media postings claiming that the child was killed by picking up some unexploded ordnance. So again, that raises more questions about whether this can be a propaganda tactic. And after watching Russian TV for the past couple of days, I can say that pictures of that child are all over Russian TV screens. So they're making the most of it.